We are here with another episode of Through the Lens of Christ, and we're talking about a Community Christian Academy. And as we embark on this endeavor to open a school, we're learning quite a bit. And so one of the things that we talked about early on as some of the leaders is what type of school and what models. And then you get into educational model. And so I had a lot of questions about what that would look like. So with me today to talk about the classical education model is Dave Bolender and Sharon Eagen. So they are both members of Community Church and also on the school board, have been a considerable aid in the launching the school in general, but also specifically around curriculum. And so I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, give a little bit of their background, and then we'll get into this idea of classical education. So Dave, if you'd like to start.
Sure. I'm Dave Bolender, and I was taught at the Medical College of Wisconsin since 1984, taught medical students, residents, taught them anatomy, embryology, and cell biology, and anything else they needed me to teach in the anatomy department. And now I'm retired, and it's been exciting for me to be part of this project for opening a school.
My name is Sharon Eagen, and I've been in education a long time. I started with homeschooling my children and then taught in the public school system in Philadelphia, and then found myself teaching at a Christian school in Southeast Michigan. So my educational journey has taken me through a lot of different types of educational settings. And so I'm really excited to be a part of this project and to bring my background as a classroom teacher, as a parent, as an educational therapist, and now the work I do, which is training teachers in schools and helping people maximize the ability to learn. So looking forward to how that works for us as we work to disciple and teach the children of Community Church.
Mm-hmm. And we've talked about it multiple times in different settings, but the fact of how God ordains things before we're even aware of what we need. And so both of you were coming to Community Church before we realized we were opening a school. And then as we begin to talk about opening a school, it's, hey, I might be able to help here and be plugged in. You get to know people's educations and backgrounds, and it's just interesting to see how God goes before us. We don't always see all the steps or the clarity of the path, usually until we're on the other side, and we kind of look back and go, that's really cool. And so I'd say that about both of you, just what you bring and all your years of education, your educational background professionally and in learning. And so just thankful for that.
I just remember a particular day when I was looking at the West Bend News, and there was a picture of that school. And we had just sort of talked a little bit about something like that, but not really. And I thought, wow, we could have a church there. And here we are. We're in that building. We bought that building, and now we're going to open a school.
Yeah.
It's just, God is amazing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so as we began talking about it, as I said earlier, we talked about educational models. And for me, a lot of this is new, right? So I'm in the process of learning the difference between traditional and classical education. And for the most part, you just kind of accept traditional as the way things are done. You don't even know there's a name for it, right? It's just school. And so learning about the different models was, for me, what really propelled me into saying, okay, I see a purpose in why we're called to open a school. There's great Christian schools around us. A lot of our families go to private Christian education. And so, there was this struggle of, okay, well, there's already some Christian schools. Do we really need to be doing this thing? And the classical aspect of what we're doing really kind of helped solidify for me what God was trying to move us along to and why it's different. So with that said, Dave and Sharon, feel free to jump in, but I'll ask Dave first. Do you have a working definition or what you've learned along the way of what classical education is?
I found a simple one. It's passing on along our heritage, which we have a rich Western heritage full of great literature, great music and art, great ideas that have been around since the Greeks, who kind of started classical education, and then the Romans added on, and then things just kept rolling. So it's an idea that's old, but it's an idea that has stood the test of time, to use a cliche, for centuries, until in America, somewhere around the late 1800s to early 1900s, things happen. One thing was the Industrial Revolution, which seems to have changed a lot of things in history, but it affected education too, because then there were people that started thinking classical education, if we were to have a goal for classical education, it would be to make better people. It's a formative experience trying to educate the whole person. Then with the changes of the Industrial Revolution, things like that, all of a sudden we started a more socialist kind of, let's make people who can fit into the revolution, the industry, big businesses, etc. And so it started more of a training for those. The focus shifted from the individual person who you were trying to form and make robust so that they could do anything that they wanted to someone who was just sort of cast in a particular pathway to go into some sort of profession or business.
More the idea of kind of we're making cogs for the wheel,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
Rather than actually developing virtuous people.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of the move from, in classical education, is we teach students how to learn, and they take that passion for learning into every area of life, and there's this love for learning. And then what we saw happen with the Industrial Revolution, like you were saying, Dave, is it went from how to learn to what to learn.
Yes.
And so it became about this idea of having a certain base of knowledge to reach some type of vocational goal, as opposed to creating thinkers who could be transformed and be transformative in society.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would suggest traditional fits the classical model better than what we're used to, which I would refer to as progressive.
Sure. Yeah, it's good distinction.
Because it was progressive people that
Yep.
are building the ideas that education is now based on.
Yeah. And the idea of classical education kind of at the core is that you were talking about not necessarily building someone to be experts in a thing, rather to be experts in learning. Mm-hmm. And so that translates across the spectrum, right? This is, if you desire to be a doctor or a lawyer, we want you to be a strong learner. We want you to ask good questions. We want you to be inquisitive and curious. If you're a car mechanic, we want you to be curious, inquisitive. We want you to be a learner, and like all of those pieces in every aspect of your life. You're a mom or a dad or a husband, wife, like this is, and how do we even understand our worldview, right? So how do we critically think through situations in the world and ask the hard questions and be able to rationally think through what's happening around us? And then we take that lens of learning and thinking and applying and provide the biblical context and say, okay, if we know what is objective truth, how do we begin to see the reality of the world played through this objective truth, learning how to think through what's happening around us through the biblical truth of Christ and God's wisdom?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, when you think, even with what you were saying, Dave, about the Industrial Revolution and equipping people for certain jobs, most of the jobs that our children today will have, they don't exist yet. Right? When you think of what the jobs that exist today that didn't exist even 10 years ago. And if you were strictly to think vocationally, you would know that your learners have to have the skill to learn, unlearn, and relearn based on the knowledge they have. And biblically, they have to know what that truth is so that they can filter through the things that society is trying to teach them, and really have to unlearn some of their worldview to relearn from a biblical perspective what it is that is true and how that impacts how they function in society and community, in the body, in the family, in the workplace.
And moral formation has always been a part of classical education, and we just refocus that on Christ.
Yep. Yep. And what is so there's three elements or three stages of the teaching process or learning process in classical education. So you want to share a little bit about those?
So when we think about classical education, there are kind of different schools of thought in classical education in terms of how they might label them, but probably the most common way of labeling them is, first of all, the grammar stage. And the grammar stage is what we think of, you might have heard grammar school, right? There's a reason it used to be called grammar school, is because that's the stage of learning in elementary school where you are learning a lot of facts, all the stuff that you didn't know. You're learning new vocabulary, you're learning new concepts, you're just learning all of this information. And then as our students go into the next phase, which we would call the logic phase, kind of aligns with middle school, is now I'm taking all this stuff that I've learned and I'm trying to make sense of it. How does it all connect? And we see this with our middle schoolers, right? As they are just kind of pushing the edge of things and trying to understand how all the stuff that they've been taught goes together. And so we go from that grammar stage of learning things to logic, making sense of how it goes together, to rhetoric, where we then become these creators of new knowledge. We kind of synthesize it. We bring it all together and we learn to express our point of views. We learn to understand what our identity is. We learn to persuade and to communicate. And that's what we see in that high school stage or that rhetoric stage. So we want to go from that grammar to that logic to that rhetoric. And so really deepening the learning for the purposes of ultimately being able to express, articulate, and generate new understanding.
Mm-hmm. And would you say that those stages align to our normal stages of learning, just our natural predispositions at certain ages?
They're age appropriate, yeah. So when kids are young, they love to memorize things and do rhymes and stuff like that, and so that's the stage to teach them a lot of the basics of things like math tables and grammar and reading and stuff like that. And then when they get to the teenage years, they start to question. And so that's a good time to teach them logic, how to think about things in a logical progression, how to interact things or connect things. And then as they get older and they become very expressive, it's a time to teach them how to express themselves in a meaningful way, in an eloquent way, in speech and writing. And it's not that these are that you only do each of these things at the age appropriate time, but they are all sort of, you use all of them all the way through, but you focus early on the grammar part, and then when you get to junior high, you sort of focus on the logic part, and then when you get to high school, you focus on the rhetoric. But these are all part of what was called the liberal arts, and they were called liberal from the Latin word which meant liberty, so that they trained you to be a free citizen, a free, useful citizen of society, somebody who had moral training as well as understanding of how to learn. And so they were grammar and logic and rhetoric, but then those were the language arts. But then there were 4 math arts, and that was arithmetic, music theory, geometry, and astronomy. And that was the heart of a liberal education, of a person that was well educated. And then as the history progressed into the Renaissance, they began to add the great ideas of Western civilization, the great art, the great literature, etc. And all that was capped by the sciences, which came from the Latin word which meant knowledge. And we had natural science, which studied the natural world, moral and philosophical science, which studied in man, the individuals, human beings, and then the queen of the sciences was theology.
So all of these pieces are working together to give us both foundation and then also a kind of building scaffolding for us to be able to think and understand so that we can know how to ask the right questions and understand how to kind of mine for truth.
Exactly.
So neither of you both have children, but neither of you have children of the age of the school. So you're involved out of the vision, out of your desire to see other children impacted. Why are you excited to not just be involved with the school, but classical education? Why are you excited to see kids in this family raised in a classical education model?
We have a generation of learners who hate learning because they have aligned it with going to school.
Sure.
And the structure of so many of our schools, particularly non-classical schools, is deadening to the souls of learners. And our kids know that. And I think that's why so many don't like school. And so to be able to reinvigorate that and to help learners, help children, and help their families understand what God created them to be as a learner, and that in his plan and his purpose and his promises for them, he has so much more. I feel like classical education is an education of hope. And I want to be a part of that.
Yeah. If you take a learner in the progressive education system that we have today, and let's say you're giving them a new schedule and they look at this schedule and they see this course and that course, and their question is, why do I have to take this? I'm not going to be a blank. You fill in the blank. If you ask somebody who's trained in classical education, they say, wow, this is going to help complete me, to fill me out and be able to do things in the future that I might need to use. So it's a different attitude toward learning. And you want somebody who, as they grow in their life, that they want to continue to learn to new things. We talk about Scripture and the fact that every time we read it, the Spirit leads us to see something new. I read that 5 times before, and all of a sudden today, as I was reading this, the Spirit showed me this, and it's been there the whole time, but I never saw it in that way before. And that's the kind of joy that we want these kids to come to the school with. The last thing I wanted to hear from my medical students was, well, just tell me what's going to be on the exam.
Yeah, there's this sense of learning for my benefit,
right?
Like my purpose. But when we talk about a classical approach, we're talking about learning to be all that God created us to be, right? And not what am I going to get out of this today for my benefit, but how is this going to help me develop into what God has for me?
And sometimes classical education is misconstrued as elitist or aristocratic, but actually, if you look at it carefully, it teaches humility because it teaches you to humble yourself before the teacher, the expert, the person who can guide you through and understanding all this great body of knowledge that we have from our heritage versus the person, like Sharon said, that is in the progressive education, which is just focused on them, and what's in it for me.
Yeah, I mean, so much of the current educational system is built around achieving something, right? And so you think about, you graduate from high school, you graduate from college. I mean, Dave, you have a PhD. That's considered a terminating degree, right? Like you've completed your education, and so you can't really do more than that, right? And the whole point of classical education is to say, no, this is an ongoing process. And I think building that within the construct of Christianity, we would say we both know God and we're learning to know God and we're knowing God. And so there's this kind of present perfect tense of something that is happening and will continue to happen. And so we don't see it as a termination. We don't have an end goal as much as learning to learn and loving to learn and building that within, again, the construct of classical education and specifically Christian education is to say we want to love the one who's unknowable, right? We want to know more about him. We want to understand. And so I want to, he made us thinking beings. He gave us brains and the ability to understand complicated concepts and to pull things together and to create worldviews. And he did all those things, not just for our benefit. He did them for his glory. And so he's trying to teach us more about himself. And we think about education as, again, a terminating process when God has given us an ongoing process. And so I think, to me, that's the beauty of classical education. And you talk about hope, right? Yeah, I mean, hope and joy and virtue. These are the things that God himself taught us. He said, in Philippians, Paul says, think on these things, right? The things that are lovely and good and true, and like, yes, all these transcendental aspects of God that we'll never fully understand. I want my kids, I have two little kids that are going to be in this program. Like, I want them to learn and be educated, and I want them to be prepared for the world and all of those things. I really want them to be equipped to know God in a new way. I want them to be equipped to continue learning about who God is and have a desire and a passion and a heart for it. And, to bring that into everything that they do. And I just think it's a beautiful construct, and our desire is to get it as right as we can.
Think of scripture that tells us to love God with our whole heart and our whole mind.
Yeah.
Right. And so he has created our minds in with such an amazing capacity for learning and understanding the world that he's created. And how can we help our children understand, how do you love God with your whole mind? And this is part of that process.
Yeah.
And I think this was what the reformers saw. They were trained themselves in this classical method of education, and they saw that this is what we need for our kids so they can understand Scripture. We want to release Scripture to the public, and we want them to learn how to learn, and then use that learning to learn Scripture.
Yep.
And to know more about God.
So, for all those who are curious about Christian education, there are certainly great resources. I should say classical Christian education. There are great resources. So you come to our website. We have lots of good links to other things that are out there, but there's plenty available. We'd just encourage you to get engaged in the process. As parents who are looking to enroll their kids, we're going to encourage you to get involved in the classical education process so that you too may be re-engaged with the learning process. But really, that we're just excited about what God is doing. We're excited about where he's leading us as a church family, but really what he's going to do for generations to come with these children. And so, again, I thank you both for sharing your wisdom on this, and I thank you for being so engaged in the school. And, I'm selfishly benefiting because of what you're desiring to do, that I'm watching my kids be raised in this. And so, personally and, over the church, thank you for your efforts and what you're doing. So thanks for joining.
Exciting.
It is.